Okay, I'm not sure I expected this month to be quite this busy. Trying my best to cover everything I want to here regardless, so we've got a longer set to get through on this month's Albumpressions. White Ward had one of the most promising debuts of 2017 with a blend of black metal, jazz, and touches of prog and industrial. Their 2019 follow-ups stripped away a lot of the last two, leaving an album I enjoyed but wasn't nearly as exciting. And False Light, thankfully, feels like a bit of a course correction, albeit not a full return to their initial sound either. For one, the mixing is way better, one of Love Exchange Failure's biggest weaknesses, and the compositions here feel a lot more kinetic, a lot more fiery. There's touches of melodic black metal riffing here even, and the melodies pop a lot more too. It does feel like they mostly sent their trademark sax to its room to only come out during quieter moments, which is a little unfortunate, and the album still does run a little long, but I found this one way easier to like than their last one, even if it's not the White Ward I originally fell in love with either. Bartees Strange has really been making a name for himself lately, huh? With a core sound of indie rock with a slight emo slant and bits and pieces of lots of other genres, pop, rap, folk, jazz, bath rock, I think it's a bit less weird and a lot more cohesive than that description makes it sound, but the variety keeps it engaging the whole way through. Bartees is also a strong and quite varied performer, and lyrically he spends the album in quite a few places, reflecting on his success and how he feels about it, a tribute to George Floyd and a few other songs looking at the state of the world, but the album as a whole explores his relationship with his parents and what they mean to him. It's well written and pretty heartwarming, even if I wouldn't quite say it speaks to me personally. And that on top of the compositions being good, but never quite outstanding, and the fairly brisk runtime, I can't say I'm 100% on board with this one, but it's still pretty cool, yeah. Definitely worth checking out. Void Hanger releases this year have been a bit dry for me, but this one caught my ear pretty much instantly. Maybe a bit different from the black metal I usually cover, a lot more meditative, kind of progressive, driven more by the riffs and bass grooves than anything. But, in that way, it kind of reminds me of a less intense Panegyrist, and that act hasn't put out anything in 4 years, so yeah, no, there's something kind of hypnotic and really cool about this, and it helps that the production is just fantastic for the sound they're going for. The content's nothing special as usual for black metal, though the excerpt used in the first track is kinda haunting for as little as you can hear it beneath the guitars and bass anyways. And while it's not necessarily quote-unquote atmospheric black metal, it does have its own languid kind of atmosphere that's easy to get enveloped in. Yeah, considering how hit or miss black metal has been this year, this one's definitely intriguing if nothing else. Oh man, This is the kind of music I'm looking for. Emo and post-hardcore that goes off in all sorts of directions, dipping into a bit of jazz, a lot of the more abrasive, dissonant sides of prog I always love, and some real intense screamo climaxes on the angrier songs here. Like, God, Contrast in particular is just one of the most heart-wrenching things I've heard since Svalbard back in 2020, for a lot of the same reasons. And a lot of the album seems to be grappling with life and mortality in a way that definitely touches on a few nerves, too. I do think the vocals, especially the cleans, can be a bit shaky, and it does run a touch short. Just not a fan of sub 35-minute runtimes, I guess. But what's on display here is as colorful as it is twisted, as beautiful as it is ugly. It's just the kind of album that excited me on first listen and already has me hungry for more. Coolest thing I've heard in months. Definitely don't skip this one, y'all. Usually I highlight albums here for quality, but this is here more for curiosity. When I first listened to this, I described it as the soundtrack to a joke I wasn't in on. And well, that's not far from the truth, since this seems to be inspired by the 1962 Philip K. Dick novel The Man in the High Castle, and well, I'm not doing a book report for an Albumpressions segment, so in short, it's set in an alternate universe where the Axis powers won World War II, and what consequences that would entail. Anyways, the music itself is bonkers. Mr. Bungler dog fashion disco level bonkers, but while I wouldn't call myself fans of the aforementioned two acts, they do at least write songs. Cohesive musical pieces, albeit weird as hell ones. Meanwhile, well, I called this a soundtrack, and it does have the feel of one. Music meant to accompany some other form of media, lacking coherent structure or continuity on its own. Yeah, it's weird and colorful, but I hardly remember any of it after it passes. I think it's cool, worth checking out, but it's a novelty I'm not going to return to. Oh lord, literally. So yeah, this is a lot. 76 minutes of Americana tinged with slowcore ambience and bombast, painting the alternate history of Ethel Cain's real-life story growing up as a queer trans woman in a highly, almost culturally religious town in the South, and her escape and journey to the West Coast, where the line between reality and fantasy starts to blur a little. Cain, in the story, growing up sexually abused by her father to the point of emotional numbness, 2 previous flings amounting to nothing, and the third she meets during her escape from the South seeming like the perfect, charming guy. Because of the social cues she's missing, him leading her on only to abuse, murder, and cannibalize her, an act of almost on-the-nose symbolism. And I'm not completely sure I'm into it as a result. It's unique to be sure, but I feel like there's something missing. Maybe there's more I'll pick up on re-listens. I do dig the style, where it's languid but not overly sleepy, the tones and textures vary enough to keep songs distinct, and there's some wonderful builds and climaxes. It's a lot, but not in a bad way. I could tiptoe around it, but let's drop the pretense. Did we really need this album? Who is it for? I can't even call it a disappointment, because my expectations weren't set high, but like, okay. This album is not bad. The songs for the most part are solid. They sound like late 2000s Porcupine Tree, alright. The only song that feels fresh, original, is the electronic Walk the Plank, and it's okay. What most sticks out to me is that, for as big into pop as Wilson has gotten, there's not really any good hooks on this album. Some solid riffs, Rat's Return is pretty sticky, and some lovely melodies. Of the New Day and Dignity say hi, but no real, like, memorable hooks, and Wilson himself is, well, his attempts at falsetto are showing his age, is all I'll say. The writing is as hit and miss as ever, though Dignity is a highlight on that front, and the album's not very cohesive overall. Just feels like a collection of songs more than a proper album. Maybe it'll grow on me, but if I wanted this sound, I'd rather just return to the older albums I already know and love. Vaxis 1 was an overlong, kinda samey album, but it did have a great new tune in Old Flames. And Claudio seems to have realized this, cause Vaxis 2 uses a recurring motif across an album that's much shorter, much more diverse, and generally just much better. It's not a huge departure or anything, still a lot of the same modern pop, punk, and emo sound mixed with classic and prog rock influences, but the tracks themselves have a lot more identity and don't overstep each other nearly as much. More experiments of synths, a few looser, groovier tracks, and a trilogy at the end that's the heaviest they sounded in like a decade. And as for the plot, okay, look, the stories have never really been the draw for me, especially as they're basically impossible to follow without supplementary material. But from what Claudio has said, I get the sense that whereas the original quadrilogy was mostly about himself, the Vaxis series is about his son, with this album in particular having a quarantine album vibe to it, which, yeah, I can hear it. I'm mostly just glad the band sounds invigorated again, though. God, don't you love it when a black metal album just sounds good? This album just sounds fantastic. Very dense and overwhelming synth-driven soundscapes mixed with a doomier, majestic black metal sound, almost like a more patient, measured Golden Ashes now that I think about it. Or less bombastic Midnight Odyssey? Somewhere between the two. Given that I love both those acts, yeah, this is absolutely my thing. It's the kind of black metal that's easy to lie down and space out to, and yes, the pun is intentional. So is me saying that listening to this makes me feel like I'm astral projecting. Space. But really, the only thing I can complain about is that it's so short, both the songs and the album as a whole. But like, man, this is just an easy win in my book. And if anything you've heard sounds like it'd be up your alley, get on this one right away. Woo, more black metal. And this one's pretty easy to explain. It's very Opethian in sound, like, I don't know how exactly to describe it, but a lot of the riffs and acoustics remind me of Opeth, especially early Opeth when they were more black than death metal, which I guess makes this the answer to what if Opeth got more into atmospheric black metal than prog, a question nobody really asked, but one that's nice to have an answer to anyways. And I could complain that it runs a little long, but honestly, I like black metal albums to run long, and it's enjoyable front to back, albeit maybe not super the verse or dynamic, but the intensity and texture is all solid, the riffs and melodies are sticky, it's got a nice ebb and flow between heavier and choir moments, not really a ton to say other than it's just plain good. Is it weird to say that this may have been my most anticipated album of the entire month? The first 2 albums in this trilogy have been frequent listens over the past 2 years, so seeing that we were finally getting a third one made me absolutely light up. And well, it's kind of a foregone conclusion that it's great. Dispater has absolutely mastered the art of texture, so the balance between the sharper symphonies and the ambient orchestral pads is phenomenal. The melodies that emerge are captivating, and it's just a sound that's super easy to get lost in. 2 things that stand out the most are how this album feels like it has a bit of a darker sound to it than the last 2, and that's exemplified by the more uneasy rhythms whenever they do appear, often at conflicting speeds in a rather disorienting way, but not in the way that clashes. It fits the atmosphere this album's going for, but more than anything, yeah, it's just beautiful and relaxing music, and I'm absolutely gonna be picking up that digipack.
Turn up the music, turn down the lights.
She's back! Actually, this is my first time listening through a full Lizzo album, and yeah, it's pretty good. She loves her throwbacks, so there's a lot of funk, disco, R&B, soft rock, Coldplay samples. Okay, so those last 2 are a bit out there, but like, it all works. And Lizzo's going through a lot of the same self-care and self-empowerment attitudes as ever, but that's hardly a bad thing, especially since she has a lot to cover, struggling with self-confidence and asserting her hotness through a body positivity anthem or 2. Though, I do think having 3 Let's Go Girls songs starting off the album might have been one too many, yeah. There's also shades of a post-breakup kiss-off to a few of the tracks, but not really in a bitter way that kills the vibe either. I do feel that none of the, like, tunes here are as good as lead single About Damn Time, or act single Rumors, which, goddamn man, why isn't that here? Too confrontational? It's not super diverse, and 35 minutes almost feels too long for it, but I still had a hell of a good time with this, so,
I have a feeling that it's falling apart. The sea, another people.
hot damn. Wow, so this is certainly the best black metal album I've heard since, God, Weege Dude at least. Ashenspire have a very raw black metal core to them with some really visceral and often dissonant guitar and drum blasts, but they also take a lot of cues from prog, post-rock, and yes, of course, jazz. More saxophone and metal, y'all. What this means is that you get all the power of black metal mixed in with a ton of intrigue and, most importantly, tension. God, this album can be tense as hell to listen to, and I love that. The vocals also take on a harsh spoken word cadence, kind of reminds me of Gareth Mason or even A Forest of Stars. Actually, the latter is a pretty good comparison in general, what with how unique and theatrical both tend to be, though they've definitely got their own distinct sounds. And while this isn't officially out as of time of writing, meaning I don't have the full lyric sheet, there's an anti-capitalist streak running through what I can find, and like, yeah, power to the people, baby. This is just plain awesome, a must listen. Yes, even you. And let's call it there, end things on a high note and all. Whoa, that was a hell of a lot to get through though. Honestly, kinda wishing for a calm month now. I need to catch up a little after all that. Anyways, whether or not that happens, I'll catch y'all in the next one.